Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a dense, damp Oregon forest.
Oh, I love the Pacific Northwest.
Right, it's gorgeous. And you look down, and right there in the exact same environment, sharing the same soil, the same water, the same air, are two rough-skinned newts.
Just hanging out on the forest floor.
Exactly. And to the naked eye, they look completely identical. I mean, totally the same. But hidden inside their biology is a secret difference.
A really important difference.
A massive one. Because one of these newts possesses a mild, like level 1 dose of poison, but the other is walking around with a massive, deadly level 10 dose.
Wow.
Right. Or let's travel over to the freezing boreal forests of Alaska. You're watching a population of snowshoe hares. They all live in the exact same woods facing the exact same lynx predators.
So same exact environment again.
Yes, but as autumn rolls in, one hare's coat molts and turns bright white a few weeks earlier than its neighbor.
Which is really the ultimate puzzle of biology, isn't it?
It totally is.
I mean, you have individuals of the exact same species occupying the exact same real estate, yet they are sporting entirely different versions of specific physical traits.
And that's exactly what we are getting into today. We have a really fascinating stack of field studies on the table, tracking everything from those toxic newts in Oregon to radio-collared snowshoe hares in Alaska.
The data on those hares is incredible, by the way.
Oh, it really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to answer one central question for you. How can a small difference between individuals completely change the future of an entire population?
To unpack that, we really have to look past the surface and drill down into the mechanics of life itself.
Like the nuts and bolts of it.
Exactly. We're going to trace a very specific, unbreakable chain of events. It starts with variation, moves to survival, relies on reproduction, and ends with inheritance.
Because when you look at the data from these field studies, the story of these newts and hares is really the mechanical blueprint for how life adapts to a dangerous world.
It's the rules of the game.
Yeah. So let's start right at the beginning of that chain. Before any adaptation can happen, before a population can change, you need raw material. You need variation.
Right, because within any breeding population, individuals simply are not clones of each other.
No, not at all.
They have variation, different versions of specific traits encoded directly into their DNA.
Which brings us back to the rough-skinned newt data from the Oregon State Park researchers.
Yeah, that population doesn't just synthesize one standard, uniform level of poison. Historically, some naturally had low poison, others had mid-level, and a few carried extreme lethal amounts.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. What does it actually mean to have level 10 poison? Because we aren't just talking about a bad stomach ache for whatever tries to eat it, right?
Oh, far from it. The newts produce a neurotoxin called tetrodotoxin, or TTX.
TTX, got it.
And it is incredibly potent. At a microscopic level, TTX works by binding perfectly to the voltage-gated sodium channels in the nerve cells of a predator.
Wait, so it basically short-circuits them.
It essentially unplugs the predator's nervous system. It causes rapid paralysis and death.
Wow.
So when we say a newt has variation in its poison levels, we mean there are slight differences in its genetic code that dictate exactly how much of this TTX neurotoxin its body is synthesizing and storing in its skin glands.
So if I can use an analogy here, having that genetic variation across a whole population is kind of like a species owning a highly diverse wardrobe.
Oh, I like that. A wardrobe.
Right. Like if you only own a single heavy winter coat and suddenly there is a massive heat wave, you have zero options. You're just done.
You'd be miserable.
Exactly. But if your population's wardrobe includes shorts, t-shirts, raincoats, and winter gear, you don't actually know what the weather is going to do tomorrow, but having those diverse options already hanging in the closet means the population is prepared for almost anything.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And the weather in your analogy is what biologists call a selection pressure.
A selection pressure.
Yes. Environmental conditions determine whether a specific trait in that genetic wardrobe is helpful, which we call adaptive, or harmful, which is non-adaptive.
Or I guess a trait could also just be neutral, right? Like it doesn't really matter either way.
Precisely. Now, for those rough-skinned newts, the weather they have to worry about isn't temperature. Their massive driving selection pressure comes in the form of a highly motivated predator.
The common garter snake.
The garter snake, exactly.
And the field studies highlight a terrifying detail about these specific snakes. They hunt using their sense of smell and taste.
Right, they flick their tongues out.
Yeah, they're testing the chemical makeup of their prey. And crucially, some of these garter snakes have actually evolved their own genetic resistance to the newt's TTX poison.
So consider the environment those newts are navigating, because the snakes are testing them chemically. Having a high level 10 poison is a highly adaptive trait. It is a direct deterrent.
It tells the snake, hey, don't eat me.
Exactly. Conversely, walking around with a level 1 poison in an environment packed with hungry, partially poison-resistant snakes, well, that's a severely non-adaptive trait.
Hold on, though. Human intuition gets a little weird right here.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, because if I'm a newt and I see 50 garter snakes surrounding my pond, I can't just stress produce more poison.
No, you cannot.
Like going to the gym to build muscle or building calluses on your hands, because people often talk about evolution like animals adapt because they need to.
I am so glad you brought this up. That is probably the most common misconception in all of biology. But the mechanics just don't support it. Individuals absolutely do not evolve during their lifetimes.
Right.
Organisms do not develop genetic traits because they want them or need them, or because they're trying to outsmart a garter snake.
They can't just wish it into existence.
No. The newt is locked in. It is stuck with whatever poison capacity its genes coded for the moment it was conceived. Evolution strictly happens to populations over multiple generations.
It's acting only on the variation that is already present.
Exactly.
So the individual newt with level 1 poison can't suddenly level up to a 10 just to survive the afternoon. It lives, survives, or dies based entirely on the hand of genetic cards it was dealt at birth.
The individual is locked in, but the distribution of those genetic cards across the entire population, well, that shifts over time.
So let's talk about how that shift actually happens on a daily basis. Because a high poison level doesn't make the newt immortal. How do these fixed, locked-in traits interact with the environment to change an organism's daily odds of survival?
Well, we are operating entirely in the realm of probability. Having a helpful adaptive trait simply improves your probability of surviving. It is never a guarantee.
Right, because a highly poisonous level 10 newt could easily get crushed by a fallen branch.
Or step out in front of a hiker's boot in the state park.
And a level 1 newt might just happen to find a fantastic snake-proof hiding spot under a log and live a long, peaceful life.
Luck is always in the mix. Luck plays a role for the individual.
But over the whole population.
Right. When you zoom out and look at a population of 10,000 newts, the math takes over. Individuals with adaptive traits have a greater chance of survival. They are simply more likely to live through the week.
And those with non-adaptive traits have a lower probability of making it.
Exactly. It's a numbers game.
You know, the radio collar data from the Alaskan snowshoe hares illustrates this probability shift incredibly well.
Oh, it really does.
Historically, in the boreal forests, the snowshoe hare's coat changes from dark brown to bright white as winter approaches. But what's fascinating is the biological trigger.
It's not the temperature dropping that causes the color change.
No. It's actually phenotypic plasticity triggered by the photoperiod, like the shortening length of daylight.
The mechanics of that are brilliant. As the days get shorter in the autumn, the hare's eyes detect the reduction in sunlight. That optical signal travels to the brain, which alters the production of hormones like melatonin.
So it's literally an internal clock reacting to the sun.
Yes. That hormonal shift tells the hair follicles to stop producing dark pigment, so the new fur grows in white. And for thousands of years, that shortening daylight perfectly correlated with the arrival of the winter snow.
The hair turns white, the snow falls, and suddenly the hair has ultimate camouflage against predators like the lynx.
A perfectly adaptive trait for that environment.
But the climate data paired with the field studies shows a massive wrench in the gears. Because of accelerating climate change, the snow is melting much earlier in the spring, and it's arriving much later in the autumn.
But the rotation of the Earth hasn't changed.
Right. The sun still sets at the exact same time it did 1,000 years ago.
Which creates a devastating biological mismatch.
Yeah.
The hormonal trigger in the hares is still firing based on the light, so they're turning white. But the ground around them is no longer covered in snow.
It's just dark brown soil and dead leaves.
So those hares are basically running around as bright white targets on dark brown dirt. They're sitting ducks.
And the data reflect exactly how brutal that mismatch is. The field studies show that these mismatched bright white hares on brown ground face a severe 7% decrease in weekly survival rates.
7%, that's huge.
It really is. They have a dramatically lower probability of surviving because predators like the lynx and raptors can spot them instantly.
It is such a stark reminder of a vital rule in biology.
Yeah.
The exact same trait, a brilliant white winter coat, can be incredibly helpful and adaptive in one environment, like a snow-covered forest.
But become completely deadly and non-adaptive in another environment, like a snowless forest.
The trait didn't change at all. The environment did.
The environment constantly acts as a filter. So right now, the Alaskan forest is strictly filtering out the hares that molt too early.
Yeah, those mismatched individuals are far less likely to survive the week.
But dodging a lynx for one afternoon or even surviving a whole year isn't actually the endgame for a species.
Not at all.
Like, if that highly camouflaged hare lives to be 5 years old but never has babies, its white coat trait essentially dies with it, right?
That's the crux of it. Survival alone is a biological dead end. Reproduction is absolutely necessary for a trait to spread through a population.
So surviving longer is really just a mechanism to create more opportunities to reproduce.
It goes back to being a numbers game. If you are a newt that lives for 5 years because your high poison keeps the snakes away, you might participate in 5 breeding seasons.
Which is a lot of chances to pass on your genes.
Exactly. But if you are a low poison newt that gets eaten in your first year, you have 0 breeding seasons.
0 babies. And we have to look at the mechanics of inheritance to understand why those numbers matter. Parents pass down their DNA to their offspring.
Right. In sexual reproduction, organisms inherit one copy of each gene from each parent. And those genes are not just abstract concepts.
No, they are direct chemical instructions for building protein molecules.
Right. So the DNA says, build this specific protein, and those proteins go to work folding and structuring the organism's physical traits.
Like the structure of the hair follicle in the hare or the poison glands in the newt.
Therefore, if the highly poisonous newts have a greater chance of survival, then a larger proportion of them survived to breed. And because a larger proportion survived, a larger proportion reproduced.
And their offspring inherit those specific high-poison genetic instructions.
Yes, and the Oregon State Park data actually quantified this shift. They looked at it over 50 generations.
50 generations, that's a lot of data.
It is. 50 generations ago, the population had a wide spread of variation. Lots of newts with mid-level poison, a good chunk with level 1 poison, but very few with extreme poison.
A really diverse wardrobe.
Exactly. But look at the population today. The newts with poison level 1 have virtually vanished.
They were simply filtered out, eaten before they could reproduce.
Meanwhile, level 10 poison became the dominant trait across the entire population. The distribution of the traits completely inverted because of differential reproduction.
So the selection pressure of the garter snakes filtered the population over and over, generation after generation, systematically removing the low poison traits from the gene pool. I always think of this like compound interest in a bank account.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. You start with a tiny advantage. Maybe the level 6 poison newts survive just slightly more often than the level 5 newts.
Just a tiny percentage point more likely.
Yeah, but that slight survival advantage pays out in reproductive dividends. They leave slightly more babies. Those babies carry the level 6 genes. They have a slight advantage, so they leave slightly more babies.
And the interest multiplies massively over many generations.
Exactly, permanently altering the genetic makeup of the whole population.
The reproductive dividends absolutely compound over time. The non-adaptive traits are pushed to the margins until they are pushed out of the population entirely.
But you know, this introduces a massive logical puzzle.
Uh-oh. Let's hear it.
Well, if natural selection only acts on variation that is already present in the population, and we know a population will just go extinct if they lack the right adaptive traits for a changing environment, where do entirely novel traits come from in the first place?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, if there were literally 0 level 10 poison newts 10,000 generations ago, how did that extreme trait suddenly appear?
For that, you have to look at the ultimate source of all novel genetic variation. Mutation.
Phonetic mutations.
Yes. A mutation is a random structural change to a gene's DNA sequence.
Yeah.
To be precise, it is often just a typo during DNA replication.
A typo.
Yeah. When a cell divides, it has to copy billions of letters of DNA. And sometimes it just inserts a wrong letter or skips a letter. Environmental factors like UV radiation can also physically break the DNA strand, causing repair errors.
So a single typo in the genetic instruction manual changes the whole recipe.
Most of the time, these typos happen in stretches of DNA that don't code for proteins, so they're completely neutral. They do absolutely nothing.
Okay.
But occasionally, a mutation occurs directly inside a coding gene. That single swapped letter changes the amino acid sequence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The amino acids fold differently, creating an entirely new 3D shape for the protein. And that altered protein physically changes the trait in the organism.
But wait, for that new trait to actually enter the population's gene pool, it can't just happen in any random cell, right? Like, if a newt gets a UV radiation mutation in a skin cell on its back, that doesn't get passed to its babies.
That is a crucial distinction. Very important. For a mutation to introduce a new trait into a population, it must occur in the germline,
The germline?
the reproductive cells, meaning the sperm or the egg. Only then can it be inherited by the offspring and enter the population's wardrobe.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and where a lot of people get tripped up.
Right.
If mutations are totally random, literally blind chemical typos, how do they ever build something as complex as a highly specialized tetrodotoxin poison or a perfectly timed white winter coat?
It feels like it shouldn't work.
It does. Doesn't the mutation happen because the population needs to survive the cold or needs to escape the snake?
What's fascinating here is how strongly we want to apply human logic and intent to a blind chemical process.
We really do.
But mutations are completely 100% random. They are equally likely to produce non-adaptive traits as they are to produce adaptive traits. In fact, most mutations that actually alter a protein are harmful or neutral.
So they do not happen on demand just because a trait would be advantageous?
Never. The mutation itself is blind.
So a random reproductive typo might give a newt's offspring completely weak poison or weirdly colored skin that makes it highly visible, or stunted legs.
Exactly. But here is the secret to the complexity. While the mutation is random, the selection by the environment is absolutely not random.
Oh, okay.
The environment is a strict, merciless editor.
So the typos are randomly generated, but the environment immediately deletes the bad ones.
Exactly like monkeys on typewriters. If a random mutation produces a trait for weaker jaws in an environment where animals only have hard seeds to eat, that animal has a dramatically lower probability of surviving.
It dies, it doesn't reproduce.
And that specific random mutation is edited out of the gene pool immediately.
Boom, gone.
But if a random mutation happens to increase the poison level just slightly in a newt, and that newt happens to live in an Oregon forest full of poison-resistant garter snakes.
Suddenly, that blind typo is highly adaptive.
Yes. That specific newt is more likely to survive. A larger proportion of its offspring survive because they inherited the typo, and that random mistake becomes the new normal over thousands of generations.
And because the snake is also mutating and evolving stronger resistance, it creates an arms race.
A massive evolutionary arms race.
The snake gets stronger, so only the newts with even more extreme poison mutations survive.
The entire complexity of the natural world relies on this constant, slow trickle of random mutations. They continuously produce greater trait variation, expanding the wardrobe, and the environment constantly, rigorously tests that wardrobe to see what fits best.
It completely reframes how you look at the world. I mean, understanding these mechanics means you can walk outside, look at any insect, any bird, any plant, and realize that its physical form is not an accident.
Every curve of a beak, every camouflage pattern.
Right. It is the physical, living record of millions of generations of environmental pressures, survival odds, and reproductive success.
It is a profound mechanism to understand. I always encourage people, whenever you look at nature, to trace that full, unbreakable chain in your mind.
Step by step.
Exactly. It always starts with variation. That variation meets the environment, which creates an environmental advantage or disadvantage.
Which dictates the probability of survival.
Right. Survival opens the door to reproduction, and reproduction ensures the inheritance of those specific traits to the next generation.
Variation to environmental advantage, to survival, to reproduction, to inheritance.
That's the unbreakable chain.
It is the heartbeat of life on Earth. But, looking at the data on those snowshoe hares does leave us with one final urgent puzzle to mull over.
Yeah, the climate mismatch.
Right. We've explored how this process works beautifully over many generations, relying on the slow trickle of random mutations and the compounding interest of reproductive success.
Takes time.
A lot of time. So if a population's environment changes incredibly fast, say, due to massive habitat destruction or sudden drastic climate
Which
shifts.
is happening right now.
Exactly. What happens to a species if the environment changes faster than random mutations can introduce new traits or faster than individuals can reproduce?